Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar of SolarPower Europe. A warm welcome to the webinar called From EU Law to National Action, Implementing the EU Solar Rooftop Standards. I'm delighted to see so many of you joining for this July webinar. Today we're going to talk about rooftop solar and buildings, but it's more than just buildings. Rooftop PV is fast becoming the entry point for consumers, for citizens, to the wider energy transition, and also the gateway to flexibility for buildings. It's a short step after rooftop PV to also consider batteries, smart appliances, demand response. So in that sense, rooftop solar is not just beneficial to households and businesses, but it's also beneficial to the entire system, to flexibility, to grids, and to all other segments of the PV industry. At SolarPower Europe, we've been very proud to work on rooftop PV for many years, and also very proud of the wins that we have been securing over the last years on the EU solar standards, which was part of the European Performance of Buildings Directive, as well as on the provisions for energy sharing, which are now embedded into European law. These were really key pillars of the solar strategy of 2022, which we then managed to translate and embed into EU law. And we're now at this very important next step, third phase, and that is the actual implementation of this legislation on the national level, on the ground. We only have 1 hour with you, and we're very pleased to have a distinguished panel as well. So over the next hour, we will start with a presentation from my colleague, Jan Ozenberg, who will guide you through how rooftop PV and decentralized flexibilities support cost-effective grid management. And then afterwards, Jan will moderate a panel with some important policymakers and industry experts. And we're very pleased to have Marijke Hendorf from Agora Energiewende, from the European Commission, Niels Ladevogel, from the German Energy Agency, Leonie Bocon, and from the solar industry, the CEO of NEOM, Walter Kreisel, and the chairman of the Solnet Group, Arthur Kulvik. Afterwards, if time allows, we should have time for a Q&A with the audience. You can make use of the Q&A tab on the Zoom app, and we'll be closing in exactly 59 minutes from now. So without further ado, I'm happy to hand over the word to my colleague Jan, who will present the new implementation guidelines from SolarPower Europe. Thank you for joining and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Dries, for the introduction into the webinar. Dries Acke, of course, the Deputy CEO of SolarPower Europe and the lead on our policy work. So let's go into SolarPower Europe's recommendations to implement the EU Solar Standard. The EU Solar Standard can lead to up to 100 gigawatts of additional PV capacity until 2030. It will integrate rooftop PV into the construction process of buildings, into permitting process, and into the electricity grids. But the success of it will really depend on how member states facilitate the adoption of rooftop PV via the EU Solar. Just checking, have you been hearing what I said in the past minutes?
Yes, Jan, all good.
Okay. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the market impact that the EU Solar Standard can have, the concrete requirements, what business models it favors over others, and then how to exactly implement it at national level. The rooftop solar market is undergoing a little bit of a challenge at the moment. We have seen the annual market growth going down from up to 40 gigawatts to roughly 33 gigawatts from the top in 2023 up until now, 2025. And this has been particularly present in the residential market, which shrank from above 17 gigawatts to 10.5 gigawatts, where we expect this year, with quite some challenges in the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, Poland, and also in Germany. For the future, we see growth picking up again. Now, really, consumer sentiment are starting to see the benefits again. In commercial, it has been a little bit more. It has been more stable, where the decline has been either not seen or negligible. And now for the future, we are also anticipating single-digit growth numbers for the coming years. Especially the French market has been strong, and also the German and the Polish market have been performing quite stably in the C&I segment. Now, the EU solar standard will introduce requirements to install solar thermal or solar PV on buildings. And it enters into force gradually, starting from 2026, with the requirement that new buildings are designed to be capable to have a solar installation in place. So sufficient static, sufficient cabling, the right roof direction for sun irradiation. The stronger requirements enter into force over time. So starting from 2027, new public and C&I buildings will have to have a solar installation. Then from 2028, renovated public and C&I buildings above a certain size threshold will need a solar installation. And then from 2030, you will also have new residential buildings and new car parks with the requirement to be equipped with PV. A big impact and a big chunk of the solar installations are on public buildings. And here we see that by 2028, on all public buildings above 2,000 square meters, there will need to be a PV installation. This size threshold then gradually lowers until 2030, where public buildings above 250 square meters will be required to have a solar installation. Of course, there are a number of exemptions to make it reasonable, to make sure that it actually makes sense. So, for example, specific building types will be excluded. So, churches, military buildings, buildings without electricity consumption are likely going to be excluded. And of course, there are also some exemptions on technical feasibility. So, when the static is not right, for example, or if there's limited economic potential of the PV installation. Still, we expect a big impact. Our back-of-the-envelope modeling, calculating the theoretical impact, shows that the overall additions until 2030 can be above 100 gigawatts. 8 gigawatt of that would be on new C&I buildings. 16 gigawatt annually would be on renovated C&I buildings. And the total potential on public buildings reaches up to 100 gigawatts. Now, the assumptions are of course the key trigger point for the numbers here, and that will be something that and the exemptions that will be of course decisive on how many PV installations are actually going to be installed. So, for example, if the renovation rate, which the EU targets to have 2%, will be actually reach 2% or will stay at 1%, there's a chance that the installations on renovated buildings are going to be lower. A big question is, of course, will the public sector finally pick up with PV installations? Traditionally, the public sector has been slow. There are a number of reasons why public procurement processes don't really favor investments into PV. So we'll have to see if this segment now picks up, if member states facilitate the procedures for them. Now, the rooftop solar standard also favors certain business models. What we see from member states who have already implemented the EU solar standards, 10 European countries actually have already done that, with starting dates either 2023 or 2024 in most countries. We can draw some conclusions. But first, talking a little bit about which buildings are in scope. We see in some countries it's residential, in some countries it's C&I, and in some countries it's public buildings, and also the different size thresholds differ quite a lot. What we see is that the PV installation gets integrated into the permitting process and into the district planning process. Usually, member states apply support schemes on top of the installation. but experience shows that exemptions are really critical. For example, in France, where there has been they have allowed green roofs instead of rooftop PV installations, that has taken a big share of the potential additional capacity. What we expect is that solar PV becomes an integral part of building design, and that ultimately lowers construction costs. So Bloomberg New Energy Finance calculated that construction costs could be up to 30% lower thanks to cost reductions on sales and marketings of PV companies, but also thanks to lower construction costs by integrating scaffolding, for example, by allowing for neighborhood approaches, which just allow faster installations. What we have seen from the merchant rule, a law in the UK that requires on-site electricity production, is that solar standards also favor BIPV development and the integration of the PV installation into the building construction process. The solar standard also favors self-consumption models. So, of course, self-consumption models are specifically prominent in the C&I segment. We expect installation sizes to be a little bit smaller, leading to higher self-consumption rates. Rather simple business models rather than very complex ones. Integration of more batteries, as many installers do as default option already today, but then also the integration of EVs and heat pumps, which are being rolled out in parallel. But how do we actually make it work in practice? What are the key levers to unlock the maximum potential? First one is we have to leverage the potential of third-party investor models. Costs and upfront investments are a key concern, not only for policymakers, but also for citizens who are now under this new requirement. Therefore, we should require citizens to make their roof available either for their own investment or for a third-party investor that does the installation for them, making sure that they have zero costs from day one and net economic benefits from day one. If these economic benefits do not materialize, the minimum installation size does not have to be the full roof, but can actually be lower. Second point, national laws must account for the grid connection of the PV project. So that means the grid connection is appropriately designed when you build the system. And whenever grid operators say you cannot install any more PV, there needs to be a robust assessment of the actual capacity based on actual numbers on congestion on the power grid. Of course, there needs to be a roadmap on rolling out demand response, removing barriers for battery storage, such as double charging, to make sure that buildings are actually capable of reducing their impact on the power grid, and where grid operators have a key role to play. Whenever there's not enough grid capacity available, grid operators must make flexible connection agreements available so that you can still connect to the power grid in vision of getting a larger connection in the future. Now, EU countries must also facilitate the sales process. We've been talking already about public procurement, and really we need simplified public procurement procedures with flexible and proportionate tendering requirements. So to really facilitate and enable public authorities to go through that process of getting a PV installation. Second idea here is that we need to develop roof tender platforms, as they are already common, where public authorities tender their building, make it available to a developer who can then bid on the installation. And this we can expand to the private sector, so that a business that will need a PV installation in the future puts their building on that platform, and then the developers get visibility on which buildings will need an installation in the future, and they can bid on the process. That makes it easier for citizens to get a high-value, low-cost PV installation, and makes it also easier for PV developers to access customers. Fourth point is we need suitable support measures, which are future-proof. First, we have to unlock the synergies with the construction industry by getting guidelines and interdisciplinary training and making sure there's collaboration between the different steps in the building construction process. When it comes to support schemes, we need to have support schemes for installations that go beyond the minimum installation sizes. We need support schemes for buildings that require renovations to be suitable for PV. and potentially for BIPV in sensitive areas. Lastly, storage can also be an area for a support scheme. With these measures, we can make sure that the EU solar standard has maximum impact on the ground. So I'm going to close this presentation here. We are now move to the next speaker, which is going to be Mareike Herrendorf from Agora Energiewende. She leads the electricity sector with Agora Energiewende. Moving on in the slides. Yes, she leads the electricity sector initiatives at Agora Energiewende, and they have published a big study on the value of decentralized flexibilities. When public officials think about such an expected rollout of rooftop PV, of course, the electricity grids are on top of their mind. And Mareike will be able to tell us how we can use decentralized flexibilities to reduce the impact on the power grid, or to even generate net benefits for power grids. Mareike, I'm handing over to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I hope you can see me, and then I would like to see the slides. Okay, fine. Let's move back on the first slide. But it's not that important. So, yeah, hi, nice to be here. I would like to give you a short overview about a study we published in 2023. The name is Utilizing Household-Related Flexibilities, and it's, in our definition, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and home storage systems. And as you see, the focus is load-related flexibility, but it also includes the feed-in of home storage systems in combination with rooftop solar and the feed-in of electrical vehicles. And the study also shows their impact on low voltage grid. Here you see how the study looks like, and the motivation for the study was that the household-related flexibilities are increasing. And of course, demand-side flexibility is very important with increasing wind and solar power generation. That's why we commissioned the Forschungsstelle für Energiewirtschaft, whether to see flexibility can be unlocked, how exactly it can be activated, and what it does to the distribution grid, to the low voltage level. And we also had a view on the overall effect. And maybe you can help me with the slides. It's not working. I can't control them now. Fine. One back. Okay. As we all know, there are these new customers I've just mentioned. This are the household relating charging infrastructure, the heat pumps, and the home storage. You can see here on the left side for the German context. And it's important to know that in the study we thought about that 25% of the electric vehicles also can feed in if necessary. And one main result of the study was that we can shift electricity consumption of households in a huge manner. It's about 100 terawatt hours, and that is more than half of the household electricity consumption in that year. And here are the results at a glance. This 100 terawatt hours I've just mentioned can be shifted in 2035. And this creates a saving in the electricity system of 5.8 billion euros alone in that year. And we can activate this flexibility by dynamic electricity tariffs, including dynamic grid fees. And the digitalization enables us to do it. And the advantage in the overall system also leads to lower electricity bills of the customers. Here you can see the different price scenarios to which we have exposed the household-related flexibilities. We have used the low flex scenario, which has a constant electricity price, an exchange electricity price, and a grid fee. This is the scenario which dominates today. There is no incentive for flexibilization. Then we have the flex scenario. There the exchange electricity price is passed on and the grid fees are constant. This scenario is increasing in Germany because this tariff has to be offered since the beginning of 2025. And there we do have an incentive of flexibilization, but just through a market signal. And then we've added two scenarios, also with a dynamic market price passed on, but also taking the grid view into account. Mean that the grid fee reflects the utilization of the grid. And if the utilization is high, the grid price is high, and vice versa. And the one which is important is the last one. It's also with a dynamic electricity price passed on, and the grid fee is a time variable in a dynamic time window, which means that the time window is determined at short notice based on the utilization forecast at the local grid transformer. And there's also taking into account some other data like weather data, the consumption forecast, and also the electricity exchange price. Another important assumption is that we said that 52% of the households with a heat pump, electric vehicle, or home storage systems in 2035 participate in dynamic tariffs. And here are one main result. You can see the cumulative grid expansion costs in the low voltage grid up to 2035 here in Germany. And as you see, the price scenario that we mostly seen today, the low flex scenario, is the best for the distribution grid. And as soon as we activate flexibility, in which the exchange electricity price is passed on, it becomes more expensive to the grid. However, this additional cost can be reduced significantly by around half when we adding dynamic grid fees. It's a green column here. And yeah, so as soon as we unlocking flexibility, we have higher grid expansion costs. But if we unlock them, we will have a huge benefit for the system as a whole, as I will show you. Therefore, it's helpful to make a note on this 5.8 billion euro, which you can see here, which represent the additional cumulative grid expansion costs up to 2035. And take it over. And here you find this additional costs on the right hand broken down to 1 year in 2035. And yeah, these are the grid costs we have more when we unlock flexibility in a grid-friendly way. But that frees up the flexibility, which does not have to be provided by dispatchable gas fire plants. And that is the column on the left you can see here. And as a result, we can save 4.8 billion euro in 2035 alone in that year, especially on gas costs. And with this in mind, we came back to the grid. And this figure shows the historic trend of line expansion in Germany and the stock we have to build up in the different price scenarios. And it can be seen that the dynamic grid fees helps to make the grid expansion feasible for the low voltage grid. And we also can see that the flex scenario in which we just passed on the electricity price is a higher challenge to reach. And this figure shows the driving force behind grid expansion in the low voltage level in Germany, and it's increasingly the load. As you can see here in the middle, the transformers and the voltage as the house connection load related are more often responsible for an overload than the feed-in related ones. And you also can see that the green columns, the prices with a dynamic grid fee helps to lower this overloads. Yeah, so overall, we think that the implementation of dynamic grid fees is worthwhile. It activates the huge amount of flexibility, it lowers the system costs, and it reduces the grid costs by 45% in comparison to unlock flexibility without dynamic grid fees. And it also lowers the bills of the customers.
That was it, Mareike?
That was it.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and bridging the gap to getting the right price signals for flexibility to integrate rooftop PV with all the electric loads that we hope to see coming on the power grid in a more system-friendly way. So thank you very much. Let's move
You're welcome.
to the panel discussion. We'll start. I'll introduce the speakers over time. Let's start with Niels Ladeforget, who's the acting head of unit in B1, the buildings unit in DG ENER, the Directorate General for Energy in the European Commission. He leads all the relevant works on energy and buildings. He has detailed expertise in energy markets and sustainability, coordinates the cross-border implementation and stakeholder engagement of the European Commission to implement their work. And he has experience from working with at the Danish level, but also in the cabinet of the commissioner in the past on systemic reforms and renewable energy adoption. Niels, great that you're here. I'm not sure if you have your camera on. If you don't, now is the time. Okay, perfect.
I do. Thank you.
Great to have you. So you've been following you have been part of the negotiations around the EPBD for this time. You are only now in the role of acting head of unit for the unit. But what has been your experience during the adoption of the EPBD?
Thank you. Yes, I followed it from the sidelines when it went on, but what I think you can say is that the EPBD legislative process was one of the more complicated ones of the Fit for 55, and one of the ones that were surrounded with quite a lot of political concerns and polarization, and one of the last ones that was closed. And this was partly because it was one of the last proposals to be made by the Commission. And as the mandate unfolded, we were operating in an increasingly challenging geopolitical environment with the Ukraine invasion and so on. So I think this has impacted the process in two ways. On the upside, I think it's now very, very evident for most people why renewables and energy efficiency and good buildings is a good thing and something we should inspire for and work towards. You know, natural gas consumption in Europe, buildings, they represent indirectly or directly 52% of all natural gas used in Europe. So with the supply crisis we had, with the price crisis we had, I think there's nobody's questioning the direction of travel anymore. But of course, in this difficult environment, there is also a lot of reasons to be afraid, nervous about all the changes we see in the world. And so this nervousness, of course, also led many, I think, to wonder how we can manage all these transitions and challenges at the same time. So in terms of lessons learned for the implementation, my main one would be that we don't need to convince people ideologically that this is the way to go, but we need to make sure things are simple. So it's really simplifying things on the ground, making it simple to do the right things, and making sure that the economic incentives that people are confronted with are aligned with doing the right thing.
Thank you very much, Niels. Now let's move to Leonie Beaucamp, who's the expert on renewable energy at the German energy agency DENA. DENA is, I would say, the internal consultancy of the energy ministry in Germany. Her work focuses on regulatory compliance, project implementation, collaboration across government and industry, and she has intensive experience working on energy. Great that you are with us, Leonie.
Thank you.
So several German federal states already apply solar standards. What are the experience? What are the experience from these federal states, and how do the requirements compare to the new EPBD requirements?
Yeah, I would say, like, looking at the EPBD and Article 10, which refers to the solar standard, the details remain quite rough on like how to fulfill the standard. But of course, in federal states in Germany, which already fulfill a solar standard or the solar standard already, of course, more details are required on how to fulfill the standard, basically. So, for example, to what extent the rooftop space needs to be covered, for example. And on the other hand, some of them leave out, for example, certain kinds of buildings, for example, residential buildings. So to some extent, details are added, and to some extent, I guess the federal states will need to adapt their regulation once EPBD comes into force.
And can I follow up? So have you had, what do the regional ministries say about, has it worked? Are they happy with their rules? Do they want to adjust, or how do they see it?
I think it differs from federal state to federal state. So of course, there's always some resistance to some extent, and I guess it also depends on the details of the federal regulations. They are all aware of the EPBD coming. Some of them are plan to revise their regulations next year. So I guess that might also be connected with EPBD coming into force. So they're aware that some changes might actually have to happen. And of course, generally the German government in the last years set some incentives to expand rooftop PV in general. So it's kind of a question how much the standards that are in force already contributed to or made people install the PV panels, and to what extent it might also be like their own interest for the moment. So that's something to look into, and that which actually happens on federal state level also.
Okay, so I understand that they are considering differentiating between people who would like to do it anyway and those that you need to force or nudge, however you want to put it.
Exactly.
Thanks a lot, Leonie. So now let's move to Arthur. Arthur Kohlweg is the chairman of the board of Solnet Group. Solnet Groups develops C&I solutions for rooftop PV solutions. Also utility scale PV installations, and increasingly also storage Arthur has extensive experience in energy digitalization. They also leverage IoT solutions for their devices. Under his chairmanship, Solnet has become one of Europe's fastest solar as a service providers. Arthur, great to have you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So can you please outline the product offering of Solnet, and how would you expect the solar mandate to change your strategy? What shifts do you see in market access or in ownership models?
Good questions. Maybe to say initially that strategy hasn't really changed with this. This has been a bit of a mission for us, starting at the SolarPower Rooftop campaign party in Brussels in 2019. So happy that this is finally getting into implementation phase after years of hard work. But we do, like you said, CNI and utility scale, PV and energy storage, both as a turnkey delivery with OEM or as a finance service, so PPA or operational lease. And we've seen kind of the shift in interest in the finance services is coming from really heavy industry and manufacturing. So they are finally moving into this and blurring kind of the lines between CNI and utility scale. Largest behind the meter project we just finished is 18.2 megawatts, and we started delivery of a 10.5 megawatt rooftop, which is 100% self-consumption. So market is shifting. Larger and larger corporates have actually gone quite far on their implementation strategy. And what we see now and hope from the new regulation is to see kind of this consolidation of regulation and best practices across Europe, and kind of finding ways of not just forcing change, but to encourage it. So making things easier and building the right kind of subsidies that encourage self-consumption models.
Right. So what you're saying is you're looking for a more streamlined process that will accelerate the administrative tasks mainly, and
Correct.
to have more really future-proof installations with minimal impact on the grid and the electricity. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And if we really want to achieve the goals, we need to think of ways how to actually enable growth past those targets. Because if we're only aiming for those targets, I'm afraid we're not going to reach them. We need to have a roadmap that enables growth on a scale that's beyond the targets. And this is where we need larger corporates. And in our experience, it's usually a fairly small team looking at multiple countries' deployment. And this is really where we see that red tape and regulation can be simplified to really speed the processes up. Because we do a lot of work in even helping customers understand how to deploy in different countries, what are the nuances, where to start, where to prioritize, why Poland takes 1 to 2 years or Germany, up to 9 to 12 months to get your actual grid connection operational. So it's really still very fragmented ways of doing things from Italy to UK, Finland to Germany, Netherlands to France. So if we make this easier and more consolidated, there's going to be more investments happening faster.
Interesting. Maybe playing the ball to Niels. When you hear Arthur speak about harmonizing and simplifying things, of course now you are in the role of leading the implementation across several member states. How do you see that you can facilitate a more harmonized adoption here?
Good question. And this is, of course, we're speaking about Europe, which is a group of countries. It's not a country. So this is at the core of the whole European project. This question, we saw the Draghi report and the Letta report emphasizing how Europe really needs to play to its strength and be getting bigger on its single market and harmonizing things to attract the investments, as Arthur just said. And going a bit into related issue of flexibility here. I will give an example that plays well to this. I'm in charge of a team that has facilitated a voluntary code of conduct for manufacturers of appliances like HVAC equipment, heat pumps, white goods, that have agreed on a common set of very basic specifications, energy smart services that appliances can deliver in an interoperable way. And if they do that, we will then, and this is a kind of one set of specifications for Europe, regardless of the precise protocols with which they communicate. And we will start now, we will propose that in the future on the energy labels for heat pumps and water heaters, we will propose a smart appliance icon on those energy labels so that people can easily identify appliances that comply with this Europe-wide specification on energy smart appliances. And we hope to promote speeding up the uptake of residential flexibility this way by having one common set that then aggregators, service providers can leverage. So I think this is one good reason of one good example of how we try to promote convergence and harmonization.
Okay, thanks a lot, Niels. Indeed, in our discussions, the problem of device-to-device communication has also come up, of course, as well as device-to-grid or device-to-service provider communication, which is with 2,000 grid operators in Europe, a huge challenge for companies that are aiming to scale. But we know that also on this, the European Commission is working. But staying on the flexibility side, Arthur, I know that, so you said the self-consumption, of course, no grid impact because there's no electricity going in. What are the other services that you are providing also with batteries that you as a or C&I installations can support the power grid?
So looking at the two things we can do. So looking at the European markets, drivers for BESS are a little different. So industry in many countries is looking at, for example, just peak shaving, load shifting, and then arbitrage on the side. However, looking at the EU countries, they are ranked very differently. So Germany, heavy industry, around 80 euros per kilowatt. Smaller consumers, 200 euros per kilowatt. Finland, 3 to 4 euros per kilowatt on capacity cost. So drivers are very different. In Finland, we see kind of high focus on reserve markets at the moment. There, what we can do with solar is FCRD down regulation with a fleet of assets, so virtual power plant pool. We can also offer the same service for batteries, so FCRN and FCRD, in Europe FCR, and those are kind of the reserve market applications there. A lot of our customers are actually looking at BESS from a kind of multi-use case scenario. So we see more and more of kind of these time of use restrictions on capacity, for example. So for manufacturing, it's not about savings anymore. It's about staying operational throughout the day, and that's where the kind of benefit comes from. On the side, when you do investments and plant them together, for example, on large scale, something like CHP and batteries and PV work really nicely complementing each other, creating base load and peak shaving and generating cheaper electricity. So it's really moving towards a more kind of complex environment and looking at more combinations of energy investments together behind the meter.
Interesting. So that also means that you're taking the industry by the hand and helping them as well in the decarbonization journey.
Correct.
Through this extremely complex story of energy procurement with different energy needs and at different times. Of course, very complicated. Arthur, you also mentioned the need to actually have targets that are beyond what we actually need, so that we in the end we actually reach them. So Leonie, going to you. Key requirements are of course around exemptions and the minimum rooftop space that you need for your PV installation. Are there any best practices that you have seen in different federal states in this regard? So what are the exemptions that you are considering reasonable at the moment? And also, what would be a reasonable requirement around rooftop space?
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's more complicated than just fixing like a certain percentage of the rooftop space that is, that needs to be covered by PV to fulfill the solar standard. We see percentages between 30 and 70% from federal state to federal state. On the other hand, flexibility is an important aspect, also assuring acceptance in the population. So some federal states actually also offer like alternatives to fulfill the standard, for example, rather handing out like a certain minimum of capacity that needs to be installed per residential unit, for example, if we're talking about residential buildings. Which can be helpful, or for example, installing solar thermal and not only PV, which is something that the federal states got quite positive feedback on. And so it always kind of depends on the context. You also have to look at the orientation of the building and of the roof, of course, whether that makes sense. And of course, economic viability is always a really important question for the owners. So yeah, there are a few questions linked to the question of how much rooftop space makes sense in that way.
Yes, there was also in our internal discussion, we saw that of course PV companies want everything that makes economic sense, but then public authorities need to have concrete, tangible requirements that don't rely on standardized calculation tools for an economic case. So but Niels, going to you, because the European Commission also published guidance on implementing the EU solar standard. Can you walk us through what you recommend EU countries to do on the concrete implementation?
Well, it's we set out a few instances of kind of interpretive guidance, let's say, where we recognize that the language may be open to interpretation and needed clarification. And then for the major part, we also try to discuss practical ways of implementing and going about it, and using examples from member states. And this guidance was really developed in close cooperation with the member states. So it was the people who are to write the national implementations out there who kind of had questions that we discussed, and we found practical solutions for. So I would say it goes a deep level deeper than the text, of course, which is very general. But then again, it doesn't go as deep as your guidance. I think they complement each other very well, because you address some other very practical and sometimes more technical and economic issues. So I think it's very useful to read the two guidance documents together. With that basis, I really think that the people on the ground in the administrations that have to implement this in the member states or in regional authorities, they don't have any excuse for not being very late, because now, I mean, a lot of thinking has been done. A lot of examples exist already. It's collected in a very nice way in these two documents. Solar Heat Europe has also made one, by the way, for solar thermal. So I think together these documents is a really, really kind of solid basis for getting a fast start on implementing this. And then I would say, for me, the headlines is really simplicity, pragmatism, trying to put yourselves in the shoes of the building owners or the installers or the local authorities who have to do all of this, because the worst thing that can happen is that we make too maximalist or too maximalist implementations that somehow create nonsensical situations. That's the kind of thing that fuels a backlash. As long as we go about this in a pragmatic sense and in a way that people can see the advantages and are not forced to do silly things, I think that this will be a success.
Thank you, Raj. It's I would always say an optimistic outlook. So now opening the floor to the questions that I see in the chat. So to all the participants, please, if you have questions to the audience, to the speakers, please write your questions into the chat. And in the meantime, we'll try to tackle the ones that are already out there. And maybe starting, so I invite the speakers to take a look at the Q&A and to pick questions that they would like to respond to. I will start. So the first question that was there by Donate Melchiore was if we expect this to lead to 100 gigawatt of additional installations per year. So that is unfortunately not the case, but more towards the end of 2030. To give you a bit of background on our modeling here, so I think the theoretical potential that we assumed was closer. Actually, it was actually above with 180 gigawatt of additional installations by 2030. We have to be careful with these numbers because there are a lot of figures that are unclear, such as the renovation rate, the number of suitable buildings that are technically capable of carrying PV. But then economic case, what are the thresholds that member states apply? Is it 10-year or 5-year payback time, or is it 20-year payback time as an economic threshold? And then lastly, we'll also have you always have patched implementation at member state level. Some member states are very advanced, and then others will take slower. So this is the potential that we put out, and we will have to continually revise these modelings to make sure they actually get close to what we foresee. So Niels, Leonie, Arthur, also Mareike, are there questions that you would like to address from the Q&A sections?
Maybe I can touch upon on the orientation and increasing the duct curve. So in most cases, it doesn't mean that the building needs to be exactly facing south, and you'd be installing south-facing modules there. If we look at kind of the orientation, most of the installations that we do are east-west oriented anyways. So when you look at an east-west oriented system, you can pretty much use the guideline of plus minus 45 degrees and from kind of the direct south orientation, and you're still producing high yields on the kind of northeast or northwest facing side of the array. So I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding that you need to really face modules a certain direction and try to optimize on the output. A lot of the times, especially if you're looking at rooftop systems designed for self-consumption, it is better to have multiple orientations of the modules to spread out that bell curve into two instead of one. And that means that you will be producing a little bit earlier in the morning and longer in the evening, being able to use more of the power that you're producing. Because it's not just about peak power, it's what can you consume. So if you're producing more midday and less in the morning and evening, but you can't consume it, you're feeding the grid, your financial benefit is lower than producing a few kilowatts less, but being able to use all of them.
Interesting. Leonie, Niels?
I'm also still scanning through the questions. I think there are a few new ones coming in now.
So maybe we just go over for the next one, because I know that Arthur will be able to respond about it. So what is the amount of battery gigawatts that you foresee for C&I and also residential in the coming years? So traditionally, batteries have been mostly done in residential just because it aligns better with the consumption patterns. But of course, C&I is also coming with dropping battery prices. Arthur, what's your take?
It's a wild guess. So largest tenders that are currently ongoing for CNI, we're talking about 200 megawatt hours or more of battery capacity. And it's purely for operations on high energy intensive locations. However, we're looking at from distribution centers starting to charge their EV distribution fleets and those distribution vehicles. And now all of a sudden they have higher peak loads and completely different worries with their drive scheduling. So this is driving kind of that megawatt to 2 megawatt range of battery systems very quickly to larger distribution centers, and smaller ones that are around 500 kilowatt systems that they're needing. So really, it's, I think, the electrification of our short and medium distance distribution networks, and then really the kind of energy intensive industries and locations, manufacturing, starting to look at this through different eyes after they all are going 100% renewables, buying GEOs. Their electricity costs are just going up. And at the same time, they have high targets for decarbonization, increasing use of renewables. So all of these are now converging into kind of the right mix of environment where scale has really grown rapidly. And that change has come in the past, I'd say, a year and a half only, when that final dip in battery prices, euro per kilowatt hour installed, has dropped dramatically. So we've really seen the move from early adopter and pilot projects to full scale execution of these projects. And you see this from grid connected and behind the meter applications just the same.
Okay, battery development is really diversifying and picking up. Great. So last question that we can take maybe for Niels about awareness in different member states. Have you already had consultations with groups of member state ministries on the implementation? What is your feeling on how are they progressing on the implementation? And then maybe as a follow-up question, that's also something that we had on our mind, is that the coordination between the different actors in the construction sector, so from the architects to the building planners, the actual building builders, and then the PV companies, that there's a lack of knowledge about PV solutions. Architects are saying we cannot do PV because we cannot calculate the payback time correctly, but that's also not their job. So two questions: one is awareness in member states. Second, coordination between the groups.
Yeah, I think let's say we are certainly working closely with the committee of the national experts and expert group in the member states that have to transpose this. So I think there's a high level of awareness about it. And we just issued this guidance package, and we continue to be available for member states to support. We will be having meetings with them bilaterally as well, of course, as we approach the guidelines. We've already, the ban on incentives for fossil fuel boilers was already enforced since January, and we've already convinced the member states that didn't communicate anything to the Commission there. So I think there is awareness that this is coming. In terms of the construction, and I think, of course, this is new. This is a major transition. It's a small revolution, but the good story here is that it's very commonsensical requirements. It's never cheaper to put solar on than when you design the building. You have more freedom and less costs. I think you make a very good point there about this. It is more cost effective if you don't have to do all kinds of those who've retrofitted solar on existing houses will know that the most difficult thing is to find a place to put the cable and all this. So it's common sense, and we just need to change some habits here, but I think we'll get there.
Okay, yeah, so we just need to change some habits is, of course, there are two sides of the story here, but thank you very much for this outlook that you're also working closely with member states here. So we'll now close this webinar. Has been really interesting that we see C&I segment really developing into batteries, also new customer types, but a lot of manufacturing taking up. The key requirement is to slash red tape and to make it easy for both off-takers but also PV developers to contribute to the EU Solar Standard. But also we are seeing rooftop PV increasingly contributing to power grid flexibility, and with the Commission's support on interoperability there as well. So that sounds very promising. Thank you very much for everyone who joined us today. Special thanks to Niels, Leonie, Arthur, and Mareike for joining us today. We had one speaker drop out, unfortunately. And so, yeah, the EU Solar Standard now marks a turning point for PV, where PV is integrated into the construction process. If you want to know more about the developments about solar PV, rooftop PV, join SolarPower Europe for regular updates on policy developments and for the opportunity to speak to Niels and to Leonie on your experiences from the ground. Our full report on the implementation recommendations is now online, so you can download it on our website, and happy to stay in touch. And also, please reach out to the speakers if you have any questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.